but I've never
Yeah.
sat and watched it start to finish, which, of course, we're talking about The Exorcist.
And she would just sit there, and if she got up, she would say, "Would you like a drink or a coffee or something?" I was like,
Yeah,
Ellen
that's a
Burstyn's getting me a drink?
that's a close encounter.
God.
Welcome to the Yo Brother podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith.
It's like Halloween Fest. We're coming down the road. I'm 10 days out from seeing you in person, God forbid.
As of this recording, yeah.
Yeah, as of this
What?
recording.
Okay, what's the deal here? You got the proper attire in the laundry, or what? That
I'm
was
glad
first
you
of all,
asked that.
that
I
shirt
didn't
was never a good shirt, but
No.
it's horrible. That's it's like, it looks like a scratch and sniff
Yeah,
shirt.
it's our old low, and I think I got credit for these. I don't think they charged me because it
I
was so
like the
horrible.
logo. I liked it, but the shirt looks horrible.
And I've got a little throwback here in the mug, if you notice.
Interesting. Oh, that's right.
Can
Because
you read it?
it's the Halloween edition
It
of
wasn't
Brother
even
Mug.
Halloween Fest yet.
Right.
It was the
That's
Halloween
right.
edition.
Well, this is the one you should be sporting, which is, of course, is the official Halloween Festo Brother Mug.
Kinda like this one here.
And Halloween Fest rolls on. So, we're going to continue not only the tradition of Halloween Fest. This is actually the penultimate episode of this year's
Right.
Halloween Fest.
Right.
But we're also continuing the tradition of seeing films that I never saw before.
Amazing to me that you've
It's
never seen this.
That's a whole segment. Films Dan should have seen
Right.
and hasn't seen.
Right.
Of course, I've seen all the main clips and this and that, but I've never
Yeah.
sat and watched it start to finish, which, of course, we're talking about The Exorcist.
Which is now out on 4K.
Pause for effect for Mike to hold up all iterations of physical media.
Well, this
Oh,
is
I
just
like the book.
Yeah, it's a digibook,
I like the
Blu-ray,
digibook. Okay.
but the quality of the 4K is so far superior.
Well, let's be honest. One of the reasons I was able to watch it in the comfort of my home was that 4K edition you just held up,
Correct.
which garnered me the digital copy of that.
That's right.
Which, by the way, I have the theatrical and the director's cut,
Mhm.
the unrated director's cut, both loaded with extras, just loaded
And
with extras.
for this episode, we both watched the director's cut.
I was out today, as you know, going around to different kind of open markets, these where the artisans are, the local vendors that bring their wares or whatever. And I stopped by, of course, one of our friends here of the show, Robbie Vamps with Vamps Emporium, at Vamps Emporium, if you want to follow her on Instagram. I stopped by her booth, and she has a lot of different things for sale, but she had these magnets, which of course I love.
Yeah.
And look what I scored.
Oh, perfect. An
I mean, how
Exorcist.
perfect
Linda
is
Blair
that?
and her
Yeah,
and her finest.
exactly.
Or is that the
Reagan.
new one? Is that the
No, this is
original?
this is the classic. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, it was the day after Christmas, 1973, when
Mhm.
The Exorcist came out.
I
You
did
wanna
not see this in the theaters.
You did okay.
I did
You
not. I was
Yeah, you still would have been quite young at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would have been disturbing if you'd said you did see it in the theater.
Right.
Let's give the tale of the tape. So, 2 hours and 2 minutes, or 2 hours and like 12 minutes, depending on which one you're watching, the director's cut or whatever. Directed by William Friedkin, based on the novel by William Peter Blatty, who we'll talk a lot about. Of
Mhm.
course, stars Ellen Burstyn. We'll talk a lot about the casting. She plays Chris McNeil. Of course, she reprises her role in The Exorcist Believer, which
Barely.
you can comment on a little bit.
I
but
will.
We're not going to talk too much about that.
No.
In fact, in full transparency, this was to be an episode on the new film,
Correct.
and we just decided we were going to bail on that because
Well,
of
I
the
told you,
early
don't
reviews.
waste your money.
Well, this before you even started watching it. We were looking at the
Yeah,
reviews, we were looking
right.
at the ratings, and we said, "No way."
And I'll tell you, those ratings were right because
Yeah,
I've seen it.
Probably a little kind. Linda Blair, of course, stars as Reagan.
12 years old.
Max von Sydow. Lee J Cobb, Jack MacGowran, and Jason Miller. Those are probably your main players in the
Kitty
film.
Wynn as well.
Kitty Wynn, yeah, but Kitty Wynn played.
Sharon, which was
See, I
like,
don't. It wasn't a big role, but that's fair.
well,
She's on the cast list, but
right, but she was in
that's a
2.
minor.
She was the only one that, along with
Yeah,
Linda Blair, that did 2,
but
and
in this film, she's probably in it 10 minutes.
she's like
She's
a
really not in it.
nanny, kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah, she's not in a
but
whole lot though.
yeah,
Now you mentioned Friedkin.
right,
Now, of course, the French Connection won the Academy Award, I think, for that, right?
correct. 70
1971.
70,
It was
yeah,
71. So
71, that's
so
right.
he's coming off the success of that film, which is
Correct,
pretty much what got him this film, or part of what got him this film. But Blatty also wanted Friedkin,
correct. And
and
they
I.
later had a falling out because they were to come together
Mhm,
for Exorcist 3, which I'm holding up,
mhm.
but they didn't see eye to eye, which if you've seen, I don't know if you watched any interviews with Friedkin outside of the DVD.
Oh, yeah. Now, Exorcist, about a $12 million budget. To date, it's grossed like 400 plus $1 million.
Yeah,
Quite
and
a.
at the time in 73 when it came out, it was the biggest hit that year,
Mhm,
was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, and
mhm.
it was kind of a joke that it only won 2. People were like, "What?"
First horror film to be nominated for Best Picture,
Right.
which was a big deal too. And I think it was sort of, it wasn't clear initially what was going on, other than the fact that the lines around the corner, waiting to get into the theater, and
Correct,
was it
yeah.
Warner Brothers? It was Warner Brothers, right? And
Um,
I think it was Warner Brothers, and they basically, my understanding is they rented out, like they kind of had
mhm.
the whole theater at that point. And
Which is yeah,
this was in the middle, in winter, right, late December,
right,
and people are
right.
waiting out for hours in the cold in line to get in. So there was an instant buzz among those that had seen it. The stories, of course, of people getting, like,
W
physically reacting to the film.
Well, ironically, like, what was it? It was this week, maybe 2 days ago, you were, I don't know where you were, in line at Publix, I think, and you snapped a picture of, I think it was People Magazine, right?
It
That's
was, yeah, I actually have it right here. I took a shot
Yeah,
of it.
and
It
you
was
you took a snapshot and sent it to me, and it was
right.
like Exorcist in big letters, "Best horror movie ever?" Question mark, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I listened to numerous commentaries. I
Oh,
watched
good.
numerous interviews and all kinds of things. There's all these stories, right, about things that occurred during the production, after the production, people
It was
died.
haunted.
It was, they were saying it was cursed, right? The whole
Right,
production was cursed, and
right,
which makes for a good story anyways, given what it's
right.
about. But I was also very surprised. I'm like, okay, at what point am I going to read on the news feeds that William Friedkin got arrested for abuse? I mean, the stuff this guy would put the cast through was
Right,
crazy, and his relationship with Linda Blair seemed a little odd. He was a very eccentric guy,
right,
clearly.
right. Well, he died just 2 months ago.
He did, and it was weird. You read something that was
I
incorrect.
did, it was a
Did you?
fake it was a
Oh,
fake.
okay, okay. I mean, he died of, like, heart failure or something
Yeah,
due to pneumonia.
pneumonia, and then he
Right.
had heart
I
failure.
meant to reach out to you and say, "Hey, I'm not sure where you saw that," but
Yes. He still has a movie unreleased that's coming out, I think, next month
no,
called,
it's on Max
oh, The
already.
Caine Mutiny is?
It's the Caine Mutiny court martial with,
Right, with Kiefer
Kiefer
Sutherland.
Sutherland, who's
Right,
gonna be, of course, with us at Spooky Empire.
right.
Not literally with us, but he's gonna
Well,
be
you'll be
there.
chatting him up, I'm
I'm gonna
sure.
try to be chatting him up, yeah. I don't know if you know about this. They do this thing where when a director, I guess, is of a certain age,
Mhm.
there's this kind of insurance policy that they have to abide by, right? They have basically a bench player,
Right,
another director on standby. God forbid something were to happen and they can't
right.
finish the film. Well, that's what happened with Friedkin and this Kane Mutiny
Caine
movie.
Mutiny.
And the director who was at his side was Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, wow.
and who was a huge fan of his anyways.
Right.
So he talked a lot about in this interview that I read about just having the opportunity to kind of watch him work. And but I wanted to just see a little of it to see if, between the French Connection and
Yeah.
Exorcist and this. And but wow, what a marvelous job the guy did on The Exorcist, though.
Yeah, and he was a rogue
Unbelievable.
director too, because in The French Connection is if you talk to somebody who's a fan of that film, the
Right.
first thing they'll say is the best car chase ever. Well,
Mhm.
that was a real car chase on a street with no permits.
Yeah.
They filmed it all illegally, basically, so it was real chase.
That's very Friedkin-esque.
It is.
Yeah. So the quick synopsis, if
Okay,
anybody doesn't know what The Exorcist is about.
right, basically, there's 3 parties, 3 players in The Exorcist. There's Max von Sydow plays a priest, and
Mhm.
he's in Iraq, which it was actually filmed in Iraq, which
Mhm.
this is before was it Saddam Hussein? Is that
Mhm. Yeah.
it was before his tenure, but it was still, like,
Right.
impossible to film there, but they did. So
Well, he had to
he's
make agreements with the local government there and the Ba'ath
yeah,
Party and all of this at the
right,
time.
and they had to teach him how to make blood, look
Yeah,
like
they did.
blood.
Basically had they said, "Okay, you gotta do film classes for the locals
That's
and do
right.
all this stuff they had to agree to." Yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, Max von Sydow's in, um, Iraq, and he gets a sense.
There's an archaeological dig going on.
Right, he comes
Right.
across this medallion, and,
Mhm.
you can't really pick this up from the movie unless you listen to the commentary or read the book, but he's basically getting a signal from the demon, which
Mm.
he has dealt with exorcisms before. And so his character's in Iraq, gets this signal, and then they show him face to face
The
with
statue.
the statue, which
Pazuzu.
represents Pazuzu, right? Which the heretic goes a lot more into that than this one does.
Mhm. The
And then we've
Heretic being the sequel.
the sequel, yeah,
Okay.
Exorcist 2. And then you got Linda Blair, who's seemingly having psychological problems. That's what it first seems like.
Mhm.
Eventually, very slowly, she develops into kind of a different being. She's being, the exorcist is
Her
happening.
behave yeah, it starts to get quite odd, yeah.
And then the third character who's having a crisis of conscience is Father Damien
Karras,
Karras,
right, played by
who
Jason Miller.
played by Jason Miller brilliantly.
Mhm.
So, the way they all come together kind of in a weird way because
Mhm.
this is based on a true story. I should have said that up front, which back then they didn't advertise. Same with To Live and Die in LA, which is also Friedkin,
Right,
was based on a true story.
right.
So this is based on a real I think it was a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, and it was Blatty, we'll call him as they refer
Right.
to him. Blatty was a student at Georgetown because the film takes place in DC,
In
even though a lot of
all
it was
around
filmed in New
Georgetown.
York and stuff, but the
Yeah,
exteriors and such, one of the opening scenes, actually, it cuts from Iraq, I think, and you're next thing you know, you're in
you're
Georgetown,
in Georgetown.
over the Georgetown campus.
Right.
But Blatty's was actual student there.
Mhm.
And one of the Jesuit priests, who's one of the professors there, tells a story of this possession case that you're talking about that happened. It's about 1949
Yeah,
nearby the Georgetown campus, which is what inspires him to write the novel
right,
ultimately.
right.
Yeah.
So, through happenstance, you know, Ellen Burstyn, her character's name is Chris, realizes this isn't just psychological, something's wrong here, and they put Linda Blair through all these tests, and you see it in the film. Those are real tests they used to do. It seems like the Stone Ages.
And, as you've been talking about, Friedkin really known for this kind of realism approach to filmmaking.
Correct.
You already gave some examples of it from the French Connection.
Mhm.
And there was the same was true with the casting, right? There's actual priests, there's actual
That's right.
the the scene you're talking about with the angiography, I think they call it,
Yeah.
right? It's this it's
Good
very
f good I'm
disturbing.
glad you pronounced that, not
Yeah, I
me.
know. It's very disturbing, but there's actual doctors that are performing it in the scene.
Correct.
Amazing
And
detail.
there's a lot of realism all around it, but,
No.
and Father Karras is questioning his faith, right? And he meets with this priest, Father Dyer, who's a good buddy of his, and he's like,
Who's an
I
actual priest.
an actual priest.
Actual priest.
This priest learns of this case of this girl being possessed, and Father Karras is also a psychiatrist. He actually treats the priests in
Right.
Georgetown for for mental illness or, depression, things of that nature, and
Mhm.
he's got an education. He's talking to Chris at one point, Ellen Burstyn, and he says, "Well, I went to Harvard," and, he's naming all these Ivy League schools that he's been to.
Mhm.
So, he's a very educated guy. He's also a boxer, and he
That's
looks
right.
like a boxer,
He does.
and,
And he's also dealing with the illness of his mother.
correct, and his mother dies, and again, he's in this real crisis mode of guilt, and somebody puts him together with Chris, Ellen Burstyn, and she's kinda begging him to take come see my daughter. I've tried everything. He has to get permission from the Catholic
She
Church.
wants him to do an
Yes.
exorcism, I should say, yeah.
Yeah,
You're right, he's kind of faithless, I think he's struggling with the fact that he couldn't do more to help his mother.
and he's guilt-ridden because his mother winds up in this kinda like it looks like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right?
It
When you
does, and which, there's these parallels like Friedkin does very subtly, right? Where there's the mom in the sanitarium, as they would call
Right,
it, strapped to the bed, cut to later with Linda Blair as Reagan when she becomes the kind of the demonic side of, Reagan,
right,
strapped to the bed. There's all these kind of parallels and things that are going on throughout the story.
right,
But,
and
Friedkin says many, many times, I know you've heard this as well because it's in the commentaries and things, but numerous times he always goes back to saying the same thing, which is this is a film about the mystery of faith. That's
yes,
it. That's how he
yes,
sums it up in every interview I've seen him talk about it.
yeah, and I think that was the disagreement with Blatty when they were gonna do the 3rd one,
Mm.
was he wanted to get away from the church and the faith and the religion. So does the new one, by the way. They kind of are trying to shy away from the church because the church doesn't often say or admit to these. There's only been, maybe a
Handful of these.
dozen, right? A
Yeah.
handful. And, there are records that prove this really happened, which is
Mhm.
really freaky. And so the church finally, Karras goes to like the heads of the church and says, I think I need to perform this exorcist or exorcism. And they don't give him permission. Instead, they say, there's another guy who's done this before. His name is Father Merrin,
As someone who's got some more experience,
more
more.
experience. Do you know
Right.
how old Max von Sydow is in this?
You mean how old he was at the time?
Yeah, in real
I mean,
life.
I would guess he was in his early 50s at most.
He was
Or
only
was he older than that?
he was only 44.
Right, the makeup is incredible. Dick Smith and Rick
Mhm.
Baker, who's a very famous makeup
Right.
artist.
Now his son is.
Right, just phenomenal job on the
Yes,
makeup.
because
But that
he
in particular,
looked
you would never know it.
no way.
You would never know it.
He looked 70s, like, late 70s to me,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just doing this podcast, I found out he was because 'cause I'm watching The Heretic, right? And there's these scenes, and he's young, and I'm like, "How did they film this?" Because they didn't have that
Deep
technology like
fake.
The Irishman where, they could de-age somebody,
Mhm.
and that's when I figured out right when I was watching that, I'm like, "Did they film this at a different was this another movie?
Mhm.
It was bizarre, and then I looked it up. He spent 4 hours a day in the makeup chair getting this makeup.
Yeah. It was
So,
it was incredible.
incredible, but he comes into the story fairly late. It's about an hour into it at
Other than
least,
that opening sequence that you talked
other than
about.
it opens on him.
Right.
So that's how these 3 characters all dealing with crisis, you know, uh, Chris with her daughter, the
Mhm.
priest with himself, his mother, the guilt, wanting to leave the church,
Mhm.
feeling unworthy, of wearing the collar,
Mhm.
and then you've got Max von Sydow, who has faced the demon before and makes it clear to Karis that because Karis is like, well, she's talked in this voice and that. He says it's one voice, it's one thing.
Exactly. Right. And there's a great line that he says in that same exchange, I think it is, where he says, "The attack is psychological and powerful. Do not listen."
That's right. That's
You
right.
know, like he's not messing around as Max
Yes.
when he goes in there. And there's you may not pick up on this as it's playing out, but in the directing of the scene, the climax of that whole sequence, Friedkin's direction to Sydow is basically to, like, he knows, his character knows performing this right is probably going to be the last thing that he ever does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And man, does he just play it beautifully. Like you said, the acting is and it's crazy because you learn, of course, if you start doing some research in the film, it's shocking that any of these people got cast.
Yeah.
That Warner Brothers ever agreed to the casting, especially Ellen Burstyn,
Yeah.
who, had a little bit of, notoriety, but not she wasn't that well known, but
No, this was early in her career.
they wanted people like Jane Fonda and Anne
Yes.
Bancroft, and there was some others, I think. But she was very adamant. I think she reached out to Friedkin and said, "I was destined to play this role."
Mhm.
Because of her own Catholic upbringing and, her pulling away from the church, and she just felt like she understood the
Yeah.
character. Jason Miller was another one, right? In fact, he almost was like, "F you, I don't," Linda Blair, right? They saw by how many hundreds of, young girls probably, right? And then,
Yeah.
what happens is Linda Blair's mother totes her into the audition,
Right.
and, ultimately she was, of course, cast, as everyone knows. Lee J. Cobb, this was the thing. Friedkin sprinkled just a couple of like these seasoned veteran actors to give
Yes.
it some gravitas, like Sydow, Lee J. Cobb,
Right.
but again, Linda Blair, Jason Miller, Ellen Burstyn, most
All
people
newcomers.
didn't really know who they were, right?
And Lee J. Cobb was fantastic in this as he you
Amazing.
know, um, Blatty writes good detectives, and his character, Kinderman is his name, Lieutenant Kinderman, played by Lee
Mhm.
J. Cobb.
Kinder man.
He comes in he comes back in part 3, but he's played by George C. Scott, right?
Oh, I can
Who's
see that. I
an
can see
Academy
that.
Award winner, but I'm telling you, Lee J. Cobb blows him away as playing the part because
I think he had a very big he was a big stage actor, I believe. I think he was from the theater,
yeah.
Lee J. Cobb, but there it's interesting because I heard Friedkin on one of the commentaries say what his favorite scene in the film was,
Mhm,
which was probably one of the most striking to me as well, which is it's just this scene between, Chris, Ellen Burstyn and Lee J. Cobb.
mhm.
It goes on for like 5 minutes, and it's some of the greatest acting you'll ever see. They're both kind of talking around the whole idea that Reagan is the
Might
one
have
who
killed
killed Burke,
that's right.
which was, played by Jack MacGowran, who actually died right after the film, like, a month after the film was released.
Wow.
He died. I believe he died in, like, January '73 or something, but, and that struck me throughout the whole film was Friedkin's patience
Yes.
and and restraint in the use of cuts.
Yes.
right? A lot of movement of the camera, but just very slow, very deliberate. I love the way he would move away from the action.
Right.
Yeah, it was
And you
so
probably
incredible.
heard this on the commentary, how he filmed Jason Miller as always ascending,
Mhm.
always coming upstairs or up a hill or up those
Right.
big stairs, and
Yeah.
because he was ascending from the depths of his faith into a person who would be the ultimate hero of the story, if you
Mhm.
wanna look at it that way. And also the way Lee J. Cobb ends the film, he's not in the ending in the director's cut, but he basically walks away from the case.
Right.
He's like, "You know what?" And like you said, they were talking all around it, but his job is to find the killer of
Sure.
who pushed Karis out the window.
There's this one shot where Ellen Burstyn goes to the door, she chains it and then opens it and just slow opens it in this reveal of Lee J. Cobb's face.
Yes,
You
yes,
know, and that's another thing Friedkin did. It was this counterbalance between light and dark, loud and quiet. Very jarring, right? It'd be a very,
right.
very quiet scene, and then something very intense would happen. And
You know,
um,
I'm surprised that you liked it, to be honest with
I
you.
thought it was fantastic,
I thought you would think it was too
fantastic.
slow, but it's
No,
like you said, he took his time.
well, we don't see that anymore these days.
No, no. Or if like, we've got these 3-hour movies that are an hour too long,
Mhm.
but in this, I'm glad we watched the longer one because
Yeah.
there's a couple of significant scenes in it. So if you get the new cut, watch them both, but watch the director's cut. Definitely listen to his commentary.
Well, what it does, shooting it like that, it allows these performances to breathe.
Ye
And I tell you what, Ellen Burstyn, it's just she's so phenomenal in this, and
Yeah.
her chemistry with Linda Blair.
Mhm.
You'd think that they were literally mother and daughter, and
There was
and
so much affection in the beginning before the possession.
right, and before the filming, right?
Yeah,
Friedkin had them getting together, and they started to build a relationship, and you see it there on screen.
you do.
It's about as natural as it gets.
And to see Ellen Burstyn go from this daunting, loving she's an actress in real
Nope.
life.
Right,
I mean,
right.
not in real life, in the
In
movie,
in the
she
film.
plays an actress.
See, this is what struck me. I didn't expect, first of all, I didn't expect the film to open the way it did. That was very I was like, "Oh, what is this?" I thought we were getting right into the creepiness, but that whole sequence that you talked about in Iraq, that's not at
Yes.
all how I thought it was gonna start. But Ellen Burstyn, um, I mean, she goes through every kind of like the range
Emotion.
of emotion. But yeah, I didn't expect that it was like she was an actress and
Right.
the whole thing is they're filming a movie at Georgetown. It was kind of interesting.
Right.
Like a movie within a movie kind of thing. Um,
Exactly.
what was your experience with her out in San Diego at the
Yeah, I
Globe?
worked at the Old Globe in San Diego, which is based on the Globe in, England, and,
And she was starring in a play that you
she
were
was
working on?
starring in a play, and I worked in the education department, and it was very quiet where I was usually alone or I had 2 supervisors who were with me, but usually I would come in. She would come in while I was there because she knew it was really quiet, and she was doing a play there at the time. This is like 19
90,
the
mid
year.
90s?
Yeah, it's like,
Mid to late 90s.
late '90s,
Yeah.
and she looked great. And I was like, "Oh my god," when she first she introduced herself, and I said,
Mhm.
I didn't ask for an autograph or anything, I didn't wanna and she sat there learning her lines,
Mm.
and I was praying she would turn and say, "Hey, you wanna run lines with me?"
That would have been
That's what I
amazing.
was praying for, but
That would
never
have been
happened,
amazing.
and I left her alone, and she would just sit there, and if she got up, she would say, Would you like a drink or a coffee or something?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Ellen
That's a
Burstyn's getting me a drink?
that's a close
Good
encounter.
gosh."
Yeah, that's great, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the look of the film, Owen Roizman, who was the DP on the film,
Mhm.
spectacular work. We talked a little bit about the makeup. I mean, another thing too, right? You realize no CGI back then.
Right.
right? And you know, very minimal things you could do with optical effects and all of that. And so this was very, very sort of old school engineers, other craftsmen and craftspeople coming up with these ingenious ways to do these different things, like how she levitates over the
Right.
bed, how the
Right.
bed moves. It just is so
Literally, they use
phenomenal.
magic to do it.
That's a great way
The
to put
way a
it.
magician would levitate
Absolutely.
and, the only thing missing was the hoop to show there's no strings or wires.
Right.
But you're right, and especially the bed. Now, I don't know if we've talked about it in the show, but I worked my way through college in a haunted house as an actor in a haunted house.
That's right. A good old Terror on Church Street, folks. The
Right, for
anybody that was in the
those
Orlando area at that time.
back then in the
It was a very great
mid-90s.
attraction. It was a great attraction.
Right,
It
and
was
there
a
was
thing
an
to do.
exorcist room,
That's right.
and there wa and I used to work a lot of times in the rooms next to it, so I would kinda sit on the bed while we were waiting for a group to come through,
Right.
and all the girls used to get bruised because the bed was all, once people came in the room, she'd hit a switch and the bed would go bouncing.
Mhm.
And that's what I when I'm watching it, I'm seeing that bed going crazy. I'm like, "Wow."
And
Uh,
did you see how they did that?
I didn't.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
didn't.
there's one featurette that you can find where it's on the other side of the wall, right? Because
Yeah.
this was a set that they built, which again
Yes.
is hard to believe. Everything looks so authentic, it's
Right.
crazy, which again is Friedkin. I mean, he wanted things to be so realistic that you know, things that maybe most filmmakers would try to steer away from was a lot of mirrors and reflective surfaces and things. He
Mhm.
said, no, if that those are the things that would be in this environment, I want them in.
Yeah.
um he they show behind the other side of the wall when the bed's going crazy. There's like five guys back there. Two of them are doing this with like levers. One guy's got a crank, you know, and it's
Right.
making the bed do all of that stuff. That's all it
Now,
was.
when Linda Blair would move, because there were times where just her body would be jumping. Did they
Yep,
show that as well?
they did.
Because
She
I didn't see
had
that.
there was one there's the first one you see is very odd, right? It's like just like her torso is going up
Right.
and
She
down, and
sits up and
they had
yeah.
her in this like back harness, you know, that they could kinda without her getting injured, and it's she talks about it too in
Right.
the interviews, you know?
Right.
So it's just all of these very practical things with
Yeah.
mechanics and whatnot.
Yeah.
Same thing with her levitating over the bed, and there was some funny things too, like Jason Miller, you know, you talk about Father Karras, you know, the whole famous pea soup
Right.
scene, right?
Right.
And they're shooting it and, you know, a couple of takes and, you know, it's supposed to hit him, like, in the chest or whatever.
Mhm.
Well, Friedkin intentionally knew,
It was
and
going right in
it
his
was going
face,
right in his
right in his
face,
mouth.
right in his mouth, which pissed Miller off. If you go back and watch, because it's the take that they kept in the movie,
Right.
he has this disgusted, kinda pissed off look, because that's not what he expected to happen.
Right.
Father Dyer you talked about, right? He's
Yes.
performing the last rites to Karis
Mhm.
after he takes the demon inside of himself and leaps out the window.
Right, and he's holding his hand.
He dives, he ends up at the bottom of what they call the Exorcist steps,
Right.
and he's doing the last rites, and well, he had to get very emotional. I guess he wasn't selling the scene, and Friedkin slaps him across the face,
Wow.
and then action. Like, how did he get away with this stuff?
Yeah, I'm shocked that
And, you know, he was
but
known
I'm
for
not well, I'm not shocked
well, people
because
would quit, and,
yep,
one of the grips said he saw one time he shook this guy's hand, "Hey, great work," and then 2 seconds later, he walked over and said, "Get rid of that guy." You know, he
right.
just was and shot after shot after shot. They said they would come in, one guy left for vacation for, like he was on sick leave for, like, 3 days, comes back, they're still shooting the same scene. It was ridiculous, but it's kinda sounds like Kubrick. I mean, the guy's,
Right.
you
Kubrick was
know
the guy of 100 takes,
yeah.
and, it's interesting because Friedkin learned from Hitchcock. He worked on The Twilight Zone with Rod Serling, so
And, you know, it's interesting you say because the Exorcist steps, what did they used to be called before people started calling them that? They were called the Hitchcock steps.
Ah,
You know, the 39 steps
39
and, you
Steps.
know, all of
Yeah,
that. He was a huge Friedkin was a big, big, big Orson Welles fan as well,
yeah,
which no surprise, again, given the techniques and things that he had to employ for this film,
yeah.
right? You
I
think
just
about Welles cutting holes in the floor to get
Right.
certain angles and things.
Last night, I just watched The Trial, which is a Kafka novel, and it's very, very complex.
Is that Anthony Perkins?
Yes, he
Okay.
stars in it, and Orson Welles plays what's called the advocate, which is his lawyer, but
Mhm.
that's for another podcast.
Did you know that, Blatty has a cameo in The Exorcist? Did you pick up on that?
Um, I think he does a lot of like Hitchcock, I think he's in a lot of his films.
Well, I'm talking Blatty, the novelist, not
Oh,
Friedkin.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but I
Is that
don't
who you
remember when it was, I don't.
It was very early, with the, one of the opening sequences where they're filming the movie at Georgetown.
Oh, okay,
He's playing the producer, ironically, he was a producer on The Exorcist.
okay.
He's playing the producer that's kinda arguing with Jack MacGowran's character,
Right,
who's the director of the film they're shooting on campus.
right, and
Very
and
good. He's very,
in
very
that
realistic.
sequence, it's like a protest, a student protest, and Ellen
Right,
Burstyn breaks through the crowd to get to the
right.
and as she's going through the crowd, she looks over and makes eye contact with Father Karras, who
Mhm.
is on he's always around the Georgetown campus because that's where,
Yeah.
um, he's a priest, so
It's a very odd reaction by Karras in that scene,
yeah, he's
isn't
got,
it?
like, a big smile.
Like he's 10 years old, like, very giddy.
Yeah,
It was odd,
yeah.
I didn't know what that was signaling. I don't know, I still don't understand that shot, but
Yeah, that was an interest, and
some
I
sort of foreshadowing I never picked up on, I guess.
right,
I don't
and,
know.
my first experience with The Exorcist was watching SNL.
Mhm.
Gilda Radner, they did a funny sketch where
Well,
she's in the bed and,
right.
her voice, and
No,
she's saying all
it
these
was it was not it wasn't Gilda, it was, name a couple of the other
Sib
women from back
w
then.
Lorraine Newman, maybe?
Yes,
Yeah,
it was
Lorraine
Lorraine
Newman,
Newman, and
yeah.
Richard Pryor is playing the
Yeah, that's
priest.
right, he's the
Yeah,
priest.
I think we showed it during the first
Ah.
look we did for Exorcist Believer. I know we played that clip on the show before.
You're such a nice little girl. I know it all the time. Here's your pea soup. Maybe now we can be friends, huh? What do you say?
That was another unexpected thing, right? Because with the special effects, that whole sequence, right? The pea soup thing where this green, right, it's coming out of her mouth. I didn't realize I wasn't expecting what actually how it plays out in the film, which is not this projectile,
Right,
constant fire hose stream of pea soup.
right.
What was more intense to me was where it's just kind of oozing out of her mouth
Yeah,
as this kind of blob of it was
and it's
really
not
gross.
pea soup, it's
No.
some kind of
Well,
because it's
it was like
very
porridge. It was a
yeah,
porridge
it was
that they
very
made
thick.
whipped up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Linda Blair had a physical double for some of her scenes as well because, like, it's very graphic. I don't know
Mhm.
how this wasn't rated X. I'm sure it was close to being rated X, and then somehow they got a
Yeah,
rated R,
just for the
rating
language.
just for the language, but, the scenes there's a very graphic scene that involves Linda Blair's character and a
Yeah,
crucifix, right?
right, right.
Well, they didn't have her do it, but if you go and watch the featurettes and the making of how they were able, because she it you they are filming Linda Blair
Mhm.
as part of that sequence, but it's not her doing those very graphic, vulgar
Okay.
things. Friedkin had a way to have her go through the motions, so to speak,
Mhm.
without doing the actual thing. It was very, very interesting how he did it.
And we just talked to a young actress and,
We
there's
did.
restrictions and things, and you mentioned how Alex Vincent in
Mhm.
Child's Play would pretend to forget his lines because he didn't wanna
He
swear.
didn't wanna curse, unlike
Right.
me here on the podcast. I'll just let him fly at
Yeah,
all,
let those
I'm
F-bombs
offending
go.
everybody, yeah.
Yeah. I had
It's,
said how Chucky was tamer this season, I was way off base.
way off. Yeah,
They are
way off.
right back to, Bloodbath,
So
so
what else to say about The Exorcist there?
I
Like,
just
what's your
I
overall assessment of it?
I to me, it is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen.
It is.
Um, the novel was it's very faithful to the novel as well,
Mhm.
and, like, if I was to rate this, I'm gonna start my own rating system pretty
I
soon.
thought you might pull it out here.
Yeah, well, I would say this is like a 92 on my
Yeah,
scale
yeah,
out of 100, and
right.
that's pretty I don't go much higher than that.
Well, I mean, every aspect of the film that you could point to is superb, right?
Yeah,
The acting and the directing and
right.
the effects and the sound editing and, like, everything. It's just
That's
the
why
screenplay, all of it.
that's why it was so disappointing when the Academy Awards were announced. This was easily the top movie of the year, and I know The Way We Were came out, and Barbara Streisand was, nominated for Best Actress, but it wound up going to somebody else
Mm.
from some obscure movie, and I don't even remember the actress's name that won. I thought Ellen Burstyn, when you watch this, how could she not win?
Her
Putting
performance is
Oh,
so spectacular.
yeah.
It's really something to watch. So
So what
with you
about you? Like, what's your take? I mean, I'm really surprised you liked it this much.
Yeah, without you teaching me the rating system yet, not I would say I would agree with your assessment. I would at least give it a 92. I might even have it a little bit higher.
Well, I
I
looked
just
up Roger Ebert's
and what
review, and he gave it 100.
he gave it 100.
He
Now,
gave
I
it
will
100.
say, because we do talk about it on the show, if you look up Rotten Tomatoes right now, you'll see it's got this is disappointing, but it's very few critical ratings, but 78%, which is ridiculous.
Wow.
87% from the audience, getting a little bit closer there.
Yeah.
Metascore 82, one of the highest I've seen.
Yeah, that's way up,
That's up there,
That's
that's
up
up there,
there.
but I would
And,
agree
the
with your assessment.
Metascore, they sometimes I don't know what their formula is because,
Mhm.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert used to use the star system. And it was 5 stars, or they had their thumbs up and thumbs down that made them
It's
famous.
not as good as the Midas system that we're gonna bring
Right,
bringing
but they
at you.
wound up converting it
Yeah.
into a number, so
Mhm. Maybe we should say that too, because again, we always like to be full transparency on the show, and you and I got in this whole beef. I took a 180 about the whole scoring thing.
right.
I'm feeling guilty like Father Karras over it. I'm thinking I might have to get on board because I can't sit here and just watch you do it the whole time.
Right,
So
right.
I'm thinking we're gonna have to talk about it and get it
The old
situated for
brother
you.
score.
It'll be coming to you in whatever form it's gonna come to you. Once we get out of Halloween Fest,
Right,
we're gonna
right.
start rocking that. But yeah, I just was blown away. Friedkin, despite his techniques and tactics, I don't know how he wasn't incarcerated back then, but it just phenomenal directing. I just
Yeah,
thought it was wonderful. But Ellen Burstyn, the whole cast was just crazy good.
top to
So highly
bottom.
recommend. Yeah, if you're somebody like me who hadn't seen it, what a
Yeah,
joy to check this one off the box.
right.
And again, thanks to Vamps Emporium for giving me this magnet.
What
Well,
about
the purchase.
slasher fans, How do you think they would look at this film? I mean, there's enough blood to go around.
I think there's enough gore, if you will, and
Yeah,
but the everything else about it is so terrifying that
yeah,
I think it would easily make up for that. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so this one's a great one. I love it. I'm glad I seen it. And your recommendation is not to watch Exorcist Believer. I think is where you're at with
In
that.
fact, every sequel,
Yeah.
there's a prequel called Dominion.
Mm,
The Heretic is unwatchable, it's so bad.
yeah.
The new one, Ellen Burstyn, I didn't clock it, but if she does 10 minutes, I'd be
Really.
surprised. I think it's under 10 minutes. The only reason she's in it, she wrote a book, A Mother's Story.
Right.
So,
And
she
to get
really
it.
does.
And to get asses and seats on the 50th anniversary of the
Right.
of the film. Yeah.
But I told you off camera, I think this was a different movie, and then
Right.
they're like, "Well, it's a 50 why don't we make it an Exorcist movie?"
We're gonna need
That's
a
what I
Dave
think.
we're gonna need a David Gordon Green rating system of some kind
Oh,
because
man.
he's got a couple of stinkers there in the old can. But so a
What good
couple of
one?
go up on a couple of notes here for as we wrap it up here. So it's a long one, but this was worth it. The
Yeah.
50th anniversary. We've gone over 50 minutes here so far, but it was worth it. This film deserved, just like
Yeah.
Friedkin, take your time with it.
Right.
I do want to say I'd be remiss if I didn't get it captured on air for posterity's sake, but happy birthday to my co-host with the most, my brother from the same mother, Mike. He's celebrating a significant birthday today, is all we'll say.
40 is, oh man,
I
40.
know. It's
Yikes.
like, yes, 40 going twice, going 3 times.
Sold.
And on a sadder note, I want to say that we just found out before we came on air that Suzanne Summers passed away, and I wanted to mention it because she has been in. She hasn't done a film. She hadn't done a film since like 2001 or something, but she
Mhm.
was in a few TV films in the late 90s that were
Yeah.
horror films. So I thought it was relevant to mention her, and also just one of those actresses who just gave me so much, so many laughs
Yeah.
as a kid. A show I probably shouldn't have been watching when I was that young, Three's Company,
Right.
but
And
she was so good.
I think today she would be applauded as a woman's rights advocate.
Well,
Back
without a doubt.
then, she was told to shut up because she wanted equal pay for the women
Mhm.
on that show. And what
Right.
did they do? They wound up filming her like on vacation,
Right.
and she was only on the phone. She couldn't even interact with the other
She
actors.
ended up on the Roper spinoff, is what
Exactly.
it was. But
And
yeah,
and it's sad.
100 episodes, she played Chrissy Snow.
Yeah.
She's now maybe she's now at the Regal Beagle with Jack Tripper, God rest his soul too. John Ritter was
I
just so
know.
amazing
Another
too. So
terrible
we've
loss.
lost some good ones. We've lost
Yep.
some good ones, but
And
yes.
ironically, tomorrow, which is October 16th, as we film this, was her birthday.
Mhm.
So she died the morning before her
She would
birthday.
have been what, 77, I think?
77, yeah.
Yeah. And what was the she became, of course, after post Three's Company, right? For
Right.
what was the exercise piece of equipment
She
that the Thigh
the
Master.
Thigh
A
Master.
Thigh Master.
Yeah.
She was
Made
one of
it.
the originals back then with that, like Jane Fonda and you
And,
know?
who's the other karate actor, that used to with Billy Joel's model
Chuck
wife?
Norris?
Yeah, Chuck Norris.
Chuck
Remember,
Norris.
he had the full gym, the total gym.
Yeah. It
Him
would be
and
him
Chris.
sliding up and down
Yeah,
pulling
yeah.
himself up and down, yeah.
And, who's the, from Vacation? Chrissy, the model.
Christy Brinkley.
Christy Brinkley. She
Yeah,
was
she
in
was
on it too.
right. This is taking a weird
I
turn, this
know.
whole
We
conclusion.
could chop
That's why I
that.
saved it for the end, It's just
Yeah,
we
it's a
had to
good
lighten
thing.
the mood a little bit after talking about
Right.
The Exorcist for an hour or
Right.
so. Well, there you go. It's the Old Brother podcast review on the 50th anniversary of The Exorcist. I can't believe it, but that's a good one. And speaking of spooky things, Mike and I are going to be in the house at Spooky Empire, the dark side of Comic-Con, October 27th through the 29th. Make sure that you come out and see us. If you're watching
Where
this
is it?
episode, it's
Where
going to be at the Hyatt Regency in
High
Orlando,
Reach,
Florida.
okay.
So if you're in town,
Come
get your
say hi.
tickets now. Yeah, get your tickets now. Stop by our table. We're going to be there all weekend. We've got a lot of good giveaways that we're going to have. So we're looking forward to hopefully interacting with a lot of people there. It's their 20th anniversary. So it's a big deal this year.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the Old Brother Podcast. I've been your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith. And we will see you next time.
Boo, everybody.